Now that we've learned these kind of core forms, let's do a demo where we're going to draw the front and back of a male form and the front and back of a female, the entire body, all in one go, just using the big major forms. We're not going to put in crazy hand details or anything like that. We're just going to get the basic feeling using those forms. So I'm going to start off here with the guy and just draw in the basic head form. Nothing too crazy, nothing too hectic. Draw in his chest, kind of imagining the proportions as well so that we can make sure he's relatively proportionately correct. So I kind of draw the heads over sometimes to measure. And our bucket shape, sort of cup shape, should I say, teacup shape for the legs. Draw in the cylinders for his arms. You can see I'm very loose with how I draw these. Just checking that that elbow touches the bottom of the rib cage. Good measuring system for the proportions there. Put that one in. And also remembering that we really don't need to draw in little circle joints. If you really want to, you can, but you really don't need to. And when you have a more developed anatomical knowledge, you really just draw the anatomy on top of these forms. You don't really need this indication of joint to know that the joint is there. Let's just make him a little bit smaller so we can fit his full body on. I'm going to draw in his legs. And something I can say as well that will be quite helpful for you is, while you're drawing, try to keep the proportions right while you're drawing. But if you mess up, don't worry about it. Just erase it or just use an adjustment on it and get it to the proportions that feel right to you, or at least that are the proportions that you want, or based on the idealistic proportions, which will make sure things look right. Okay. So here I can check. I'm just going to press hard, do it one stroke. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're relatively right there. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're relatively right there. And his proportions are okay. His proportions are okay. His shoulder width, just checking that and just roughing it in a little bit more, drawing through to feel those forms. And speaking of drawing through, you might find that after a while you get very used to the idea of the forms, that you may not draw through everything. You'll kind of do it more in a shorthand sense and really just have center lines down things to help you kind of figure out and understand where the middle of objects are and where the middle of the forms are. Let's just connect his neck more there with that sphere, and we'll draw through there where it connects to the base of his head. All right, and for the hands, for the time being, we're just going to put circles there just to indicate them. And then I'm going to draw a back view of this same character. Just imagining those forms, and perhaps his neck is plugging in over here. Using a cylinder for that. Kind of tilting his chest a little bit, imagining the back of his torso. And because the front view is right here, the back view, it's going to be easy for me to really just kind of copy across most of the measurements so that my proportions are roughly the same. You can see I'm very loose, and it really is just structural, very, very structural drawings. Get the structure to read relatively fine. This doesn't have to look nice or neat or pretty or anything like that when you're doing these forms. And you can as well see the opposing curves constantly at work in the form, getting a very believable looking human form quite easily. Not much effort, just bending those forms and keeping them nice and dynamic. And usually one side of these cylinders is bigger than the other in terms of the elliptical sections, so it gives us that directionality in the forms. And using our understanding of opposing curves to just oppose, just make the legs oppose one another. Cylinders, and we'll then draw the back of these triangles in this instance. It's triangular forms, so they're shorter at the back, longer at the front. And there we have just a very basic, very rough form sketch of the male. Let's do a female version, and just before we leave the male version, let's just label this as male. Just before we leave the male version, let's not forget that kind of key rule of having broad shoulders and narrower hips on the male, right? Broad shoulders and narrower hips on males. And then we want to have shorter shoulders and wider hips on females, right? Wider at the hips. Let's now do just the rough version of the forms of the female. And we'll start very much the same way. Start with the male forms, get a cranium shape in there, attach our jaw shape to that. Keep it rough, keep it loose. I'm going to put the chest in here before the neck. And we want to remember really that we want to keep the shoulders narrower on the female and the hips broader, just as a general rule for getting that very feminine look in. And our cup shape for the pelvis, adding center lines down things to help us understand center. Can draw through as well to help us just feel out that mass. And then give her broader hips here. Really get her hips to come out more broadly than the males. And really it's just these very simple forms with dynamism applied to them that lets us get to that level of believability when we start adding the details onto the forms. And just drawing in those basic building blocks for the feet. Just imagining the forms, drawing through the forms, imagining and feeling them out, like what is the full 3D form of this particular object. And we can add in the arms. We'll just keep the hands very simple as well. And feel free to really experiment as well in terms of how the curves are happening on these dynamic cylinders. You can really just, it doesn't always have to oppose in this particular way. You can change the direction of the opposing. Let's just find that little crink in her neck where we can feel out the form of the breasts and apply our form theory there. These kind of soft malleable masses that flatten at the bottom, kind of using that, kind of just lightly using that heart shape idea to get them to read well. And I'm checking the proportions of the nipple line there, and I think that's okay for the forms there. And then we can do the back view. And really it's the same structures. Here we will see the neck more because of the angle. And just drawing those forms. I'm using a very rough, just a shorthand way to get these forms down. But it's exactly the same thing really, all the same theory. Get the pelvis in. Plugging in the arms. You can see I also do this very quickly, and really speed comes with time, with practice, but I would always encourage you to just try and draw fast as much as you can. Especially with construction, there's no need to draw slowly. Your hand is really just making marks. I mean, there's not much to putting the pen down and swirling it around a little bit. So just in terms of construction, let the theory guide you, and just be quick about it, and build the construction that you need, and be messy and be loose, because construction sites are messy, and people building great things usually a messy process. It's not usually this pristinely perfect step-by-step wonderful thing. It's construction sites are messy. Making a cake is messy, doing art is messy, right? Cooking good meals is generally quite messy. You don't do it in a neat way. And we're just putting these basic shapes there, maybe not exactly the same angles, but relatively the same. Her shoulders here are a little bit broad, so I'm going to bring that form in. Just make the shoulders a little less broad. Keep the hips kind of wide. And the proportions are a little bit different. The scaling of the head is just a little bit different. It's not the end of the world. It's relatively the same. It's relatively okay. All right. And this will be our basic, very basic female forms where we're stacking them, building them together. Let's go back to the male form now. And let's actually just put those labels in there as well. We want the front and the back. Go back to our male form, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my eraser and just lightly erase the base forms here so that I can draw over it, just do a quick kind of skin surface layer over it, and just kind of use the forms underneath to guide. I'll add an ear there just for a little bit more appeal, using the underlying forms to kind of guide where I put these lines. And I'm not doing majorly complex anatomy here. I'm just really being guided by those forms, just doing single lines, not too sketchy. Kind of let the skin go in a little bit here at the chest. Just put in some lines there. I know that there is a bump for the knees, so I'm going to add that in. Draw in the crotch section here. Keep it simple. Just being guided by the forms. I don't even connect every line necessarily. And using my knowledge of how the opposing curves work at the feet just to guide me in doing the skin surface layer here. And the hands we won't worry about too much. Just kind of indicate them a little bit. And we'll do this back view. Face kind of comes out the front, something like that. And just really in many ways, just kind of tracing what we see, even with a very elementary knowledge of anatomy, you can get pretty effective looking skin surface layer just by following the forms, right? Just get these elementary kind of hand indications in. And I just want to take this line a bit in. I just feel like it's a little bit too overlapping that line of the arm. Draw this in. Following the forms, but connecting all the surface layers to each other. Don't suppose we'd see much of the knee from that angle. And then following the forms there, back of the foot, here as well. And I know that perhaps this may seem somewhat overly basic, but these are the basics we need to grasp very firmly before we start getting into complex and very detailed elements. I assume the buttocks is going to fall something like that on his form. We'll just keep it very simple for now and just use kind of a V shape, upside down kind of V shape for that, and indicate those elements. And let's just do the top of his head as well. Right, very, very basic, keeping things simple. Let's go into the female. Once again, I'll erase her as well, just to so that my skin lines kind of show more and stand out more. And once again, it's really very much the same thing. Just kind of going to go over those basic forms that we put in and connect all the elements together. Just being guided in a very rough way by our forms. So while I'm doing this, we can talk a little bit about advanced anatomical study. At the end of the course, at the end of module 3, mind you, there is a video discussing how to study anatomy in a more advanced way. So that, of course, I definitely recommend that you watch that. Anatomy is something that is going to take a long time to learn, but it shouldn't be something that stops you from continuing through the course, because when you have the basic anatomy, you can start drawing great characters, and always constantly learning anatomy will help you improve the realism of the anatomical forms themselves. But not all styles call for hyper-realistic anatomy, which is great, especially if you are into doing more stylized work, whilst knowing the advanced anatomy is definitely always an advantage. A lot of the stylization, while built on the fundamental anatomy, doesn't really call for you to draw in every micro detail of every muscle. So here we're doing the back view, just drawing in those neck forms. And these look very clunky and basic, but that's really the point. That really is the point. We want to just keep things simple. Maybe I'll even indicate her breast a little bit there. This breast size here, they're not exactly the same. Let me just fix the sizing up. Draw a line, a planning line here for the volumes, and then have them be at roughly the same height as each other. Just rough it in there. All right. Carrying on with this. Just following the forms. Just getting a very basic skin layer version. Nothing too informed really by anatomy, by advanced anatomy, just kind of keeping things simple, getting the feeling of doing this, right? Just following those forms. And this isn't about good looking work. I know I've said that, probably said that already, but just get the hang of it. Get the hang of this very basic thing. We can refine pieces and bring things up to a professional level at different stages. For now, we just want to get this kind of idea of like, let's build forms and then put stuff on top of the forms. And these are very, very elementary drawings, very, very elementary drawings. But these are the basics we need to go through. And I really have tried to make sure that you don't feel throughout the course that, you know, even the examples are unachievable. Now, I feel like you should be achieving something at this sort of level, at this sort of look, at this stage in the course. And so there we have in a nutshell, just using those forms that we've learned and putting the skin layer on top of them. And just getting something that looks solid, right? No crazy overlaps are being done yet. No crazy detailings being done yet. Just basics. All right, I hope that this demo was informative and will help you when you're doing your exercises. Let's move on to the next lesson.